I, 44 male, caught my daughter, 15, having in our home and I don't know what to do. My wife is out of town, and my son is on break at college, so it's just me and my daughter. I was meant to come home late from work yesterday since I had a lot of corporate nonsense to deal with, but I discovered I missed a few papers at my office at home, so I had to come home sooner than intended. When I get home, I head upstairs and down the hall to my office, where I see my daughter's room door is about halfway open. I wouldn't have hesitated if I hadn't heard breathing sounds coming from her chamber. I reluctantly glanced in, thinking, believe it or not, that it might have been my wife cheating on me. Instead, I see my daughter perched on her lover. I became dizzy and ill to my stomach all of a sudden. As much as I wanted to rush in and grab the youngster by the neck, my more rational conscience informed me that my daughter would despise me and, more importantly, would be horrified if I caught them. So it took all I had simply to stroll inside my office slowly and get to work, attempting to ignore what had just transpired. Last night, I ended myself sleeping at my workplace. I'm fairly confident my daughter recognized I knew she was having last night since she seemed a bit closed off and unwilling to chat much when I came down for breakfast this morning. I'm guessing she saw my office light on and me sleeping early in the morning and assumed I strolled by them last night. Anyway, I'm rather irritated right now for a variety of reasons. I believe my daughter is too young for, and I'm certain that most parents would agree. I'm not sure what to say or do to her, but I'd want to sit down with her and discuss. The last thing I need is for me to brush this problem aside and convince her that having in my home with my knowledge is absolutely okay. There is undoubtedly sadness and disappointment with my rage since I feel like there was also a significant amount of disrespect on my daughter's part for not attempting to disguise it. Yes, I returned home early, but it was to my house. I haven't spoken to my wife yet, and she won't get back to me until Thursday. Update: yesterday, I felt a bit more calm and collected than the day after I found out what was going on. My daughter's breakfast with me was quick since I had just prepared my coffee and had run out. I wasn't attempting to get away from her. I had 2 board meetings to attend that day, one of which I was in charge of, so I didn't have much time. Later in the afternoon, I returned home. Daughter has returned home. She greets me with a hug and kiss before proceeding to be really nice and shy with me. She inquired about my day and what business goals I had in mind. Things she hasn't wanted to speak about in a long time. This alone was a red sign, indicating that she assumed I was aware of her and her boyfriend, Chris. My daughter asked if she may join me on the sofa to watch a movie until she fell asleep. She sat on my lap with her head on a cushion and watched the movie. I'll confess that seeing her head on my lap gave me mixed emotions since it reminded me of when she was 7 years old and she would always watch TV with me like that. Surprisingly, those recollections started to reduce my disappointment. It was at that time that I got really calm about the situation and recognized how much my love for her would always outweigh any disappointments. I contacted her mother after she had fallen asleep and informed her what had occurred. She was taken aback, but she was prepared, knowing that she would have to perform the most of the work when this day arrived. We discussed a strategy for dealing with her arrival today. Today, in the morning, I pick up my wife from the airport. We agreed it wouldn't be a good idea to approach her both at the same time. Her mother would break the news to her and quickly take her to acquire contraception and an education class. Then I'd call her when she got home. Finally, my wife would continue to talk with her about the more intimate and detailed concerns that we both knew I wouldn't be comfortable or proper discussing with her. Our daughter was astonished and humiliated, according to my wife, to learn that I had seen her and Chris. She apologized to her mother and urged her not to be upset, telling her that she was silly for doing it in public. She was concerned about how I would think, but my wife told her that I loved her and that I would like to find things out with her assistance. They went out to acquire birth control pills and condoms, and my wife gave her a full rundown on both contraceptive usage throughout that journey. When they got home, my daughter ran upstairs to hide from me. She informed her mother that she needed an hour before I spoke with her. I gave her that time and space before approaching her for our chat. She was embarrassed to look me in the eyes, but I told her that I needed her help to get through this. I informed her that her mother would speak to her later about the more intimate topics and that she didn't have to mention any of that in our chat since I didn't want her to either. From the questions I posed, I received the following responses. For nearly 4 months, she and Chris had been having. When they first began having, Chris was also a virgin. It was both of their ideas to start having, but it was more of a 60-40 split with the boy being the majority. There was mutual agreement, and neither party forced the other to do anything they didn't want to do. There was just one occasion when Chris mistakenly did something she didn't want, but she immediately warned him, and he apologized and stopped. This made me realize that I wanted to sit down with little Romeo and talk to him. That was the first time they had in our house. The rest of the time was spent at his residence. Chris's parents are both aware that there is in their household. They, too, discovered the hard way. Both believed they were too young, but they eventually accepted it and spoke to Chris about it. His father is more permissive of his children having than his mother is. His mother is still uncomfortable with them being at home behind closed doors, but his father, like any archetypal father with his kid, is more comfortable with it at this time. His father had a conversation with Chris about how to treat my daughter appropriately, which I was relieved to hear. I closed our conversation by informing her that, as a father, I was sorry to learn that she was having it at such a young age and hoped she had waited a little longer. But I made it obvious to her that I was speaking from the perspective of the majority of parents. I adored her and would never judge her for exploring her in the same way that other teens her age did. Her emotions and desires are normal for a girl her age. There's nothing to be embarrassed of. I only wanted her to be more discreet about her discoveries, as she is about all other private topics in her life. She apologized again and told me she was silly for not being more cautious and considerate of the possibilities of anybody else being at home. I advised her not to think about it any longer and to move on. I underlined that I wanted her to be safe at all times and that if she was old enough to have, she was also old enough to be responsible about contraception usage and the danger of being pregnant. I warned her not to expect her mother and me to take on the duty of rearing her possible kid while she went about her life. We all have jobs, obligations, and lifestyles. And, since having is a privilege, not a right, she would be responsible for buying the BC tablets and condoms from her savings account, which we would set up for her. I told her I loved her and that I would always be available for her if she had any questions or worries. I told her I was going to have a respectful discussion with Chris about the subject this weekend, and she agreed. Thank you to everyone who contributed. Aside from some of the prejudiced viewpoints, all of you were wonderful and assisted me in guiding my responsibilities as a parent in this sort of circumstance in the proper path. Thank you really lot. Final update, I have a very busy schedule, but since a big number of people have asked for a final update, I will send one as promised. I've felt a lot more at ease and comfortable after our conversation with our daughter. When I got home from the gym yesterday, my daughter approached me and said that she had a brief conversation with Chris on Saturday night, telling him what I knew and what we had discussed a few days before. He was outraged that they had been apprehended and assumed I intended to murder him. She told him that I had calmed down and that she wanted to be nice with him. She didn't tell him I wanted to sit down with him someday in the future and simply chat about house rules and such because she was concerned he'd have a nervous breakdown. She opted to postpone that notion till later. My daughter then informs me that Chris contacted her yesterday morning and asked if he could speak with me. He informed her that he had always imagined I was still violent and furious from my college football days, which terrified him. But he believed he'd be an idiot if he didn't own up to his conduct and come to me to explain his side of the story. He said that if he placed himself in my position, he would probably respond the same way I did at first, and that it would be wrong to leave the situation as if he did not want to show any disrespect to my wife and myself. I loved hearing all of it, and I must confess that the youngster started to grow on me at that moment. That takes a lot of maturity for a 15-year-old to remark. My daughter informed him that I would be departing for Europe on Tuesday and would not be returning for a long, so he should hurry and have the conversation if he truly wanted to. So he decided to pay us a visit on Sunday evening. I told him immediately away that he should calm down since I wasn't furious or confrontational. I assured him that being severe did not imply that I was uncaring. We sat down, and before anything else, I went through the house rules and what I expected from both of them in our home. I informed him that, in light of recent occurrences, I believe they are now both compelled to manage themselves as young adults and deal with any parts of their relationship on their own. They can always come to us for help and information, but in the end, they will be the ones to make the final decisions in their relationship. All I hoped for was mutual respect, agreement, and compromise. He comprehended what I said and immediately started apologizing for what had transpired that night. He stated he didn't want to offend me or my wife, and that they had debated shutting the door but stupidly concluded it wouldn't matter. I advised him to calm down and that I had placed myself in his position during the previous few days and recognized how simple it would be for a pair of teens to act on a whim and not be cautious about what they did. I informed him that whether you're alone or not, basic decency is always important. What you do will inevitably have an impact on others at some time in the future. He claimed that his parents were aware but had just lately discovered it, a few weeks. He claimed they were surprised and didn't sure whether they should contact my wife and me because they were afraid we would lash out at our daughter. Instead, his father took on the duty of speaking with Chris about what he needed to know. He said that his parents had the same conversation with him as we had with our daughter, and that his parents agreed to allow their son be responsible for the purchase and usage of condoms. And for those who felt it was harsh for me to have my daughter pay for her own contraception, this kid, unlike my daughter, has to pay for his own goods with an allowance that is half of my daughter's, which he has mainly earned in some manner. His parents offer monies for all critical and typical charges that Chris may incur, but require him to pay for any items he uses for fun times from his allowance, which includes condoms. I encouraged him not to worry about the money since, because my daughter is in a similar situation, they can work together to divide the expenses or trade off purchasing what they need to keep secure. They may also speak with one another to remind one another of what has to be done and when, so that we, the adults, do not have to become involved in their business. I discussed a few of other topics that I won't go into depth about due to time and space constraints. I concluded our chat by telling him that he was a fantastic student athlete with a bright future, much like my daughter in her academic career, and that they both had high expectations and ambitions. However, if individuals continue to make the incorrect decisions, the actuality of their ambitions will not materialize. Thank you to everyone who assisted. Thank you very much.